Welcome back. In this episode, we're joined by Matt Taylor, the voice of the Indianapolis Colts. We talk about his journey from Franklin College to the NFL, what it really takes to prepare for every broadcast, and why the biggest part of success often comes down to staying authentic and saying yes to opportunities others might overlook. This isn't just about sports broadcasting. It's about building a career step by step, learning as you go, and finding your own voice along the way. So slow down and join us for this conversation with Matt Taylor.
My name's Matt Taylor, and I'm the voice of the Indianapolis Colts.
I want to get into your background because I know that you grew up in Indy and attended Franklin College. So how did you go from being in Indy to then becoming the voice of the Colts? What was that journey?
Well, it was a journey. I graduated college, and then I had a bunch of sort of odd jobs in broadcasting. I did small college sports play-by-play and high school play-by-play. I actually worked sort of in this area. I worked at a country music station in Newcastle, and it was just to, network and get experience. I mean, I don't particularly love new country music, but it was just, it was just fun, right? It was just a way to get behind a mic and, just sort of discover who you are. And so I had a chance to. Another odd job I had was in 2008. Got a job offer from MS Communications, downtown Indianapolis. I was part-time as part-time could be, but, started at the lowest rung of the ladder there and then just started working my way up within the cluster of stations that they owned in Indianapolis, including 1070 The Fan at the time, which was the flagship or still is the flagship station of all the big major sports properties in town: Colts, Pacers, IU, IndyCar, the IHSAA. So I was able to kind of, work my way up there and, get a full-time job. And then in 2012, was full-time there. And then in 2012, seems like a long time ago, I got a job offer to join the Colts. And the initial job there was to basically just run the radio network, do everything except call the game, produce shows, weekly content, game day content, manage all of the radio affiliates. So, I like to say like my DNA, like my thumbprint is all over everything. And now I'm doing play-by-play on top of all of that other stuff. So it's kind of a jack of all trades job where you're juggling a lot of balls, but I kind of joke it beats working. It beats having a real job. And that's sort of how I've looked at it all these years.
So you started with the Colts behind the scenes more so.
Yeah. I mean, you from a Colts standpoint, like you name it, I've done it from a media perspective, like hosting pregame radio shows, postgame radio shows, TV play-by-play, radio play-by-play, hosting the television, sort of like a magazine style studio show. I've done that. So, it's one of those things where you just try to show off, a lot of your versatility, show your passion, show your drive and your commitment to it. So, when there was a time where new roles opened up, that you'd be top of mind because of all the trust and versatility that you've displayed, for 7 or 8 years.
Did it ever take you outside of Indiana?
No, okay. No. I was one of those people, I told myself at the time, like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it here. I'm going to do it locally in Indiana and specifically in Indianapolis because there's just too much going on. Like there's so many opportunities here, like I wasn't, that type of person that was just going to move to Montana to do AA baseball and chase a dream, like there's just so many opportunities here and so many big brands. You've got in Indianapolis, you've got the professional teams with the Colts and the Pacers. The Indianapolis Indians are a AAA team. IU and Purdue and Notre Dame, IndyCar and the IHSA. So there was just too many opportunities to sort of leave the market and explore. And plus I didn't want to move. I was dating my wife at the time. She was, my girlfriend / fiance. I mean, I didn't want to move her all over the country to chase a dream. She's close to her family. I'm close to my family. So we just sort of made an agreement that like, if I'm going to do this professionally, I'm going to do it here, take it as far as I can go with it. And thankfully I've not had to to uproot, the family system.
Was this job always your goal? Did you know that after graduating college or even going into college that this is what you
Yeah, I think it really became solidified. I knew going into college that I wanted to do something in radio or like, entertainment. The first time I got behind the mic, I think when I was afforded the ability to go to a small school, like I wanted to go play, I wanted to go play football. That was a big reason why I went there. But as soon as I got there, like it just became really clear that I could really take advantage of all the different resources that going to a smaller school provided me at the time. I think things have changed so much in terms of media and digital media in the last 20, 25 years. But, when I was in school, this is 2004,
Mhm.
right? So there were no uh, smartphones and YouTube and streaming, like those things weren't, social media didn't exist. So I studied traditional TV and radio. And um, to me at the time, that was the perfect place to be because, I wasn't going to a bigger school where I had to wait in line. I didn't go to a Ball State or in Indiana. Nothing against those schools at the time. They're great schools. But going to a smaller school, I was able to get behind the mic right away, do men's basketball and women's basketball and baseball and just do a million games.
Mhm.
So to me, it didn't matter that, the audience wasn't very big. It just mattered that I was getting the experience and I was making mistakes and learning from them and getting more comfortable behind the mic and just sort of developing your own style and who you are and just gaining comfort in every aspect of it. So, um, the first time I ever called a game, I was hooked. Like, okay, now I want to do sports. Now I want to do sports on the radio. And then it just became really, I was crazed about it. Then I just became obsessed with it and started listening to anything and everything on the radio in terms of sports and trying to flat out mimic and duplicate who I thought was really good.
Mm.
And so I just became like a melting pot of listening to all these different people that I like listening to and respected. And at the same time, making it my own. But after that, it just became pretty clear like, this is what I wanted to do. And what are the steps I need to do it? How can I do this professionally? So it wasn't necessarily the Colts per se,
Mm.
But I knew I wanted to I knew I wanted to work in sports broadcasting and do it professionally and do it as close to home as possible.
So I was curious to know who you kind of looked up to as you were becoming in this position
Yeah.
and how you did create your own voice.
I've always been really interested in sports. I mean, I played sports. My dad was a great athlete himself. And that's just sort of like what we did growing up. Like we just went to games. My dad has been a season ticket holder for IU football and basketball for like 30 years. So it's just what we did. And so it sounds cliche, but like we were just like that father son duo that like went to games.
Mm.
And then on the way home, we would talk about the game and then we would listen to another game. And so, specifically the IU football days, they weren't growing when I was growing up, they weren't very good. And so we would always sort of just kind of go down there for the sake of going down because it's a good, good atmosphere. It's a good, place to watch a game. But we would typically the drill was we would typically leave at halftime or the first drive of the third quarter, depending on how it went. But then we would drive home. We would listen to Don Fisher, or we would listen to um, Joe McConnell call a Purdue game, or Don Crickey call a Notre Dame game. Or we would turn on the national game of the week on Westwood One. So we would just scan the radio, and that's really how I became really impressionable about sports on radio and how to do it and what sounded good. So then I just started, my ears just became trained to listen to what I thought was good. And I still do that to this day. I will turn on like a Thursday night football game or a Monday night football game, and I'll turn on the radio. I'll turn on, Sirius XM for the NFL package, and I'll listen to Team A in the first quarter and then Team B in the second quarter and just pick up, how guys are doing it. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. I just think what's good is good.
Mhm.
And so you can pick up little bits and pieces of what guys do and make it your own and kind of mold it into the melting pot of who you are as a broadcaster. So I think that's just the fun part of doing this, is that, the way I do it in terms of my on-air delivery and style and my organization and my prep, it may not make sense to you, but it makes sense to me. And so you're not going to please everybody, like I think we all prefer different things and people, and certainly broadcasting is part of that, but you just do it to the best of your ability, and you stay true to who you are and just have a blast doing it.
I think authenticity makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're not your true self, like, you know, the reality in this business is a lot of people end up doing this for a long time. And so you get, the fan bases sort of, these broadcasters become part of the fabric of the teams and the markets, like Harry Carey with the Cubs, or certainly Don Fisher with IU. I think to some degree, I think the broadcasters become more synonymous with the brand than the players and the coaches, who are so transient, year to year. I think you have to be yourself. I think you have to, like in my position, I followed a guy that did it for 35 years. So I made it a point to, just, I'm not going to be that person. I'm not going to, there's no way I can live up to Bob Laney's standards. But I can do the best job I can, and I can do it the way that best suits me. And so as long as you're true to yourself, and you have that authenticity to your own self and your own personality, and stay true to your own character, then I think people will notice that and appreciate that about who you are and the job that you're trying to do, to the position.
Do you remember the first time you called a Colts game?
I do.
Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So it was in 2014. Bob had actually become ill, and it was week 17 at the time. Now there's 18 weeks, but it was the last week of the regular season. Bob had become ill, and we were getting ready to play the Tennessee Titans. And I found out that he wasn't going to make the road trip about an hour before we were getting on the plane. And so, like, I'm always prepared, just because I put the whole game day presentation together. But there's a difference between doing that and then being prepared to do play by play, right? So, yeah, found out about an hour before the plane ride took off. Got to Nashville. Thankfully, it's not a crazy long flight. Got straight to the hotel, then just started grinding. Stayed up till about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, just trying to be over prepared and try to do a good job. That first time you're on the air doing an NFL game, doing play by play, like there's so many emotions going through your mind, because, you want to do a good job and you want to paint a good picture, but also, like, in the recesses of your brain, it's like, oh my God, like the 10-year-old version of me is actually doing what he wanted to do, So it was a big, like, pinch myself type of moment. And, it was a great environment. The game, I have no idea how the game went in terms of like the big plays. All I know is the Colts won. It was just it was a huge thrill, and something that I always look back on in terms of like the scramble nature of the whole day, trying to get ready. I mean, I think I was on the air because I was still doing the pregame show at that time too. So like I was on the air for like 7 straight hours. So like when we finally signed off, like I was like, one of those like cartoon characters who's just exhausted, threw off the headset and just grabbed a water and decompressed for a little bit. I'll never forget it, just being how nervous, excited, and all those different balls of emotion all wrapped into like 3 hours doing play by play.
Can you walk through what preparations look like heading into games?
Yeah.
Has that changed over time for you?
I wouldn't say it's changed. It's probably intensified, just because, with the NFL, there's so much information. Um, there are so many people that cover the league. And so a big part of my routine every day, really, not just in season, but out of season, is I just read a lot. I read because there's so much coverage year round on not only the Colts, but the AFC South and the entire league. I think it's one of the more underrated things that anybody could do, especially somebody in my position, is just read. It helps with so many things because I clip out information, so it helps me stay organized, but it also just like generates thoughts, and it spurs ideas for content, because that's a big part of my job, is just creating content on one particular topic, which is the Indianapolis Colts, all year long. And so, a lot of times, depending on where you're at in the calendar year, like some of these topics or storylines, they don't progress all that much, right? I mean, once the season's over, then you've got a little bit of time between free agency and then a little bit of time between the draft. So, like, you've got to be creative in how you're uh, talking about the Colts, because you have to do it every day. We have inventory on radio every single day. We do digital podcasts. So you got to stay unique and creative and fresh while talking about only one thing all year long. So reading helps generate thoughts, and it helps generate ideas to present maybe the same sort of topics, but do it in a different creative way, present it from a different angle. And then I'll start organizing all my spotting charts. I wish I would have brought some in for you. I think maintaining those spotting charts and those research pieces of information that I have all year long is so vital. And that's what it is I probably over prepare, but being a former athlete, I sort of subscribe to the idea of the Vince Lombardi line, like failure to prepare is preparing to fail. You know what I mean? So I'm probably way over prepared, but during a game, you maybe use like 5% of what you're actually, ready to go with. Mm-hmm. But you never know what that 5% is going to be. And there's a big payoff, like as a broadcaster, when something actually comes to fruition that you don't think anyone else has, in terms of information or education on like what's actually happening during the game, then it actually like comes to fruition, and you've studied it and you've memorized it, or where you put it based in your organization within your notes, and then you can like bring it out in real time when it's most applicable. Like that's the payoff. Like that's why you do it. So you don't want to go out of your way to bring those pieces of information to life, because I think then you're maybe overloading people with information. But like when you've got the right nugget, if you will, at the right time, like it's a really good feeling knowing that the work has been worth it.
So that was my next question, was when something unexpected might happen or a play breaks, what does that feel like in your headset to keep up this momentum of energy while presenting it?
There's a lot of different forces going on during the game. Like I've got a producer and a studio host. I've got a statistician. I've got an analyst, and I've got a sideline reporter. And all of those people have direct communication to me. And I hear at least 3 voices every single play. And so you have to talk through those things. You have to be able to hear and compartmentalize, but also speak clearly and eloquently enough to be heard. You also have to, it's just like playing a game of chess in your brain. It's like, okay, what piece of information was I just given, and what order do they need to come out in? So it's like, strategizing, your approach for 3 straight hours, while also having your own thoughts about, how to describe the game and what best descriptive words you need, and anticipating things. That's a big payoff too, is when you have other people around you helping you do your job, and you're able to incorporate them in the necessary order. It's like being an air traffic controller. It's like a symphony in motion when you're actually doing it.
Do you have any memorable moments that you would like to touch on?
Sure. I mean, there's been, unfortunately, I've been play-by-play guy since 2018. And unfortunately, in that time, the Colts have only made the playoffs once. So we're still looking for more like team memorable moments, like playoff success and overall franchise success. But, within that, there's been great moments, like that had been a Terry breaking the all-time field goal record in my first year. That was a great moment. That first year I did it, 2018. I don't know if you remember much about that season, but it was kind of a wild ride. The Colts started off 1-5, and then they won 9 of their last 10 to get into playoffs, and they actually won a playoff game. So that was a huge thrill for me, like my first year, to call a playoff game and then call a playoff win like that. Mm-hmm. That was, super, super, just from a individual standpoint, that was a great high. But, a lot of individual great moments. You mentioned the Berlin game last year, and on one play, Jonathan Taylor breaks the Colts record for longest rushing touchdown in Colts history, but then has the breaks the Colts record for rushing touchdowns in a season and on one play. Um, and then just that whole game and experience was just surreal. It was played in Berlin, first ever NFL game played in Berlin, but it was played at Olympic Stadium, which it has so much history, good and bad, just in terms of human history. Jesse Owens, with the 1936 Olympics, everybody had an American flag. And so it was red, white, and blue on this half. And everybody over here had parts of a German flag. So, it was just, it felt like the Super Bowl, the Olympics, and the World Cup, like all in one. It was really, really, really neat. That's what those international games are. It's just you don't realize the reach and the breadth that the NFL has internationally, but they're just football fans everywhere. And they know the game. They're really educational about football over there. And it was just a great game, great experience. But unfortunately, after that game, that was sort of the zenith of the Colts season last year, right? They were 8-2, and then after that, they lost their last 7 games. A lot of circumstances went into it, but that's the nature of the league, I guess. Not for long, right? NFL stands for not for long, so you can't take anything for granted.
Do you also get to interview athletes and coaches? So you kind of get a little bit of both.
There's tons of aspects about my job that like I try to think I don't take for granted, but like I'm sure I do, because it just becomes like anything else. It becomes normal. It becomes standard and routine and just what you do and it just becomes part of the job, and it is part of the job. But I love looking at, like I know I get job shadowed, like someone asks to come, you know, hang out in the office for a day, like a, college kid or something, and they get to walk into the locker room or see the practice field or, see the radio booth at Lucas Oil Stadium. And you just like you see these things that you've seen a million times, but you see it through their eyes for the first time. And then it makes you step back and like appreciate just like how privileged you are and how special it is to be able to do what you do. And so, to talk to these world class athletes in the locker room, like you just forget like how special that is and how many people would line up to have my job for even for a day. But you also just forget like how special these guys are. They're the 1% of the 1% that get to play football at the highest level. And they are so good at what they do. In saying that, they're also 99% of them. I've been doing this for 15 years. I can think on one hand, like the amount of bad apples that I've actually talked to, but they're just all so down to earth. They're just normal guys. They're very accommodating and willing to, especially when you've been there as long as I have. You build up rapport, you build up some synergy with these guys. They know what to expect, when I'm talking to them and how I'm going to frame things. I'm always going to be objective and have integrity, but they know that I'm not out to get them, and it's all going to be within the framework of, working for the team. Talking to these players it's a great honor. Talking to the coaches, we have a coaches show on Monday nights in the season. So, Shane Steichen or Frank Reich or Chuck Pagano, they always come down, and I've been very fortunate to have good rapport with them. And I would go as far as say, build up some friendships with them. And it's just all built on um, professionalism and trust. There's times where they let their guard down a little bit, let their hair down a little bit, and just sort of just shoot the ball, which I always really, really enjoy, because these guys work so hard and they put in so much time. At the end of the day, they're human beings. They're guys that have emotions and feelings just like everybody else. So it's nice to sort of just cut through the layers of the onion to get down to the real core of somebody that you work with.
What advice do you give to young people who look to you for inspiration?
Well, the biggest piece of like real world advice I can give that really helped me was just don't say no. Like from a professional standpoint, just do anything, because it serves so many purposes. Like you might do something where you don't feel like it's going to serve you or you don't want to do it. And it either might confirm that or you might open up another, window of possibility where you end up might liking something. But the biggest real world story that I have when it comes to that piece of advice is, I mentioned I worked at Emmis and I got a call. I was 22 years old and I got a call to do, I'm sure they just, grabbed my resume off a stack of papers and they said, this is 2008. So it's before Twitter. It's before social media really. And so we need someone to come in and answer telephones for a high school sports show that airs on Fridays and Saturday nights from 9:30 to midnight. So I would literally answer the phone. People all around the state of Indiana would call in the sports scores of their basketball team or their football team. I'd answer the phone. I'd jot it down on a piece of paper. I'd collect all the scores and I'd give them to the producer. Like literally that's all I did. So you can imagine like being 22 years old and, like all your friends still in that kind of like college hangout, go out scene. And sorry guys, I got to beg off because I have to go answer phones and make minimum wage doing it and give up my entire weekend. So it's like, it's a crazy job. It's a crappy job, but it's one of those where like, if you don't do it, you don't get your foot in the door. And then once you get the foot in the door, then you can bang down the door and show what you're made of and all that versatility and your passion. So long story short, like 3 months later, I'm producing that show. Then I'm producing a lot of other shows within the cluster, and then I'm on air, and then I'm doing play-by-play, and then I'm a full-time guy, and then I'm with the Colts. So if I say no to that crap job, I say no to everything that can happen to me potentially after that as it relates to networking and building trust and showing versatility and getting in front of other people, decision makers, right? So, I mean, that's life. So that's the biggest piece of advice is just don't say no to anything. Treat everything like you do, like it's the Super Bowl because it's your Super Bowl. You never know who's watching and you never know who's listening.
Do you get much of an off season?
No, no, no. There is the NFL. An off season in the NFL doesn't exist by design because, this calendar routine that we're on now has probably been in place for the last 10 or 15 years. But whoever came up with it is a genius because the NFL never goes away, right? If you think about it, play the Super Bowl, that's the end of the playoffs. And then 2 weeks later in February, you got the combine. The combine's always like the big launching pad for draft season. So that's its own, that's its own tent pole event. Like if you don't cover the combine, you cover the NFL and you don't go to the combine, you're behind the eight ball, right? So you got that. 2 weeks after that, 3 weeks after that, you got free agency. 3 weeks after that, you got the draft. Then you got rookie minicamp, and then you got OTAs, and you got mandatory minicamp and owners meetings and schedule releases. Like it just never stops. Like all of those things are their own, tent pole events. And I think, believe it or not, this is a true story. Like sometimes our numbers in terms of analytics, like who's reading, who's watching, who's listening, things you can track. Like I think there's more people or just as many people interested in the business of football. Like what are we going to do in the off season? What free agents are we going to bring in? Who are we going to draft? There's more people, just as many people interested in that as a, week 8, middle of October game against the Jaguars. And so, I mean, in my first couple of years in the NFL, like, it was before it was on the infancy of social media and iPhones and how we just consume everything in our pockets and digital media. So I went from honestly, like kind of having a lot of time to game plan for the next year to not even knowing when to take time off. Like I think now that this time of year is sort of like the closest thing to a slow period of time. But even that's only like a month, like between mini camp and training camp. So, but baked into that time, you have to have this like slow ramp up towards the start of training camp and making sure you got everything for the broadcast ready to go and you're prepared for the preseason games and all of these things. Because once training camp starts, you don't have time for anything. Like it's 7 days a week for 7 months. So you have to have those preseason opponents prep for, because once camp starts, you don't really have time to do it. So it's, like I said, it's a crazy job. You're definitely balancing a lot of different things on your calendar. But it like I said, it beats having a real job. And the running joke that my wife and I have is once training camp starts, we always say, like, I'll talk to you in February, so but that's how it goes. It really does. You can't do this job. I couldn't have this job if I didn't have, like, her support, family support, and, like, understanding from close family and friends, because it really does sort of consume you. It does kind of take over your life. But in saying that, like, once the game starts on Sundays and you're either at a home game or a road game, like, there's no other place you'd rather be. Like, in my opinion, there's no other drug that can replace that high of, like, the anticipation of a big game and the crowd and the energy and the job you have to do in the back of your head to bring the game to life for those that are depending on you to do that with your words listening on radio.
Is there anything that you want people to know?
I think, the biggest goal that I feel I have is to, if you're a Colts fan, it's to help enrich your game day experience. So I'm pretty real about how people consume sports and really anything. I know that 99% of the radio audience listening is probably listening because they can't be at the game or they can't be in front of the TV, right? It's a very transient type of a medium. So you have to know that most of the people that you get that are with you aren't going to be with you for 3 straight hours, right? They're with you for 10 minutes going, on the way home from church, or they're picking up a prescription, or they're on the way home from a soccer practice, or whatever it is. So you've got to do the best you can to educate them, inform them, but also just, like, bring the game to life. Not to get, like, too in the weeds with it, but I'm just there to enhance your game day experience, be as pinpoint accurate as possible, but give you information that hopefully you're not going to get anywhere else, that you come away more educated. And it makes you want to come back. Like, next time you're in the car, you make sure you want to listen to the Colts, or heck, maybe you get to wherever you're going, or maybe you're on your way home and you're sitting in your driveway and you don't want to turn off the radio because you're having a good time. Like, that's always the goal that we want to have, is to be as accurate as possible, descriptive as possible, but entertaining, and have it be just a conversation. And so there's a lot of different, different competing thoughts there. But, like, when you really know you have something when, people say to you, like, I just so enjoy listening to games. Like, you make it, your energy is good, and the information is good. It just feels like we're there. And I think that's the biggest compliment that you can get, is people take enjoyment based on how you're using your voice as an instrument and the picture that you're painting with your words and your description.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Matt as much as I did. And if you want to find more stories just like this one, head on over to our website, thehometownheadlines.com. There we have a link to our YouTube channel where you can find this video and many more. Stay kind, stay connected, and keep looking for good.